In a league with some of the very best athletes on the planet, during an era of the NBA known for its brutal physicality,
I wouldn't want Fisher necessarily to take that shot that fast.
Oh, and there's a swing by O'Neal, and they got a blue.
this little guy, of all people, somehow found a way to take over the league. That can't be true, right? Wrong. In spite of being undersized, underappreciated,
Once, but not twice over the diesel. Twice, 2 times in a row.
and scorned at every level,
Steve Nash called him foul. Steve Blake called him soft, and then Swick called him like, oh shit.
Not the white on white. The white on white crap.
Steve Nash was able to beat LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and Shaquille O'Neal during their prime. How is that possible? Well, it took him over 25 years of sacrifice and hard work, and a coach or two to finally believe in him.
What I would call one of the most unique human beings I've ever been around as a passer.
But when Steve Nash finally got the green light, boy, was it embarrassing for the rest of the league. Today, we're going into the unbelievable rise of Steve Nash and how a shitty soccer player overcame the odds and made everyone in the NBA regret disrespecting him. Have you ever wanted to be like Mike?
The foul on Wingate is his first.
To have the insane confidence, determination, and passion towards your goals. To be a leader, someone people follow without all the downsides of fame. Now you can with the Champions Blueprint, a program I'm designing to take you from wasted potential to peak performance in 30 days, using the transformative habits and mindsets of the world's greatest athletes. For a limited time, I'm offering a free mental toughness test, MJ Confidence Meditation, and a private coaching session for those who qualify. In the one-on-one session, your struggles and breakthroughs will help guide the direction of this course. So if you've ever wanted to seriously grow with a coach who's got your best interests in mind, while also giving back to a community of others just like you, now you can. Get started by clicking the link in the comments. Now, back to the video. Before we investigate exactly why Steve Nash was so overlooked, we have to start at the beginning, because MVP Steve was almost never a thing. Steve Nash was raised in a household that revolved around one sport and one sport only: soccer. Steve's father was a former pro who played in both England and South Africa. His sister was a local standout who wound up playing collegiately. And his brother? He went on to play for Canada's national team. In fact, soccer was so ubiquitous in Nash's household that Steve's first word was literally goal. But after Nash discovered basketball as a young teenager, he quickly realized he had a knack for the game. Everything he had learned in soccer, the footwork, reading defenses, precision passing, was available to him in basketball, and he learned the game incredibly fast. As a senior in high school, Nash averaged nearly a triple-double, leading his team single-handedly to the British Columbia's provincial championship. Suddenly, Nash was being talked about as Canada's best basketball prospect ever, which left him with a difficult choice. Should he continue to pursue soccer or basketball? Apparently, the answer to that question came from Spike Lee. You heard that right. Nash grew up a huge fan of Spike Lee movies and Chicago's Bulls superstar Michael Jordan. With these two American icons in mind, Nash felt inspired to carve out his own version of the American dream. And so he started looking for scholarships to play at any American university that would take a chance on him. But that proved to be more difficult for Nash than he could have ever expected. Being from Canada, Nash went completely unrecruited out of high school. In fact, Nash had to literally handwrite 30 letters to different American universities and beg them to look at his resume. No one cared and no one answered. Except for one: the lowly Santa Clara University. When the men's basketball coach Dick Davey first saw footage of Steve Nash, he was, quote, nervous as hell that someone from one of the bigger programs would see him too, because what he saw was an elite athlete.
Steve might have been able, and I can't say this for sure, but might have been able to be a pro in 4 different sports.
But even though the coach gave Nash an opportunity at achieving his basketball dream, playing in the US wasn't easy. Nash struggled against tougher competition. In one of his early practices, his teammate forced so many turnovers on him that his coach Davey had to stop the game and then walk Nash to the other side of the court saying, quote, "Think you can do it from here?" Embarrassing him in front of the entire team.
It's hard on me, especially when I first got there.
But for a guy like Steve Nash, that moment was a gift in disguise.
there, and I'll say it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
Later that season, Nash led the Broncos to a conference championship and their first NCAA tournament berth in 5 years. The team went on to defeat the number 2 ranked school in the nation, the Arizona Wildcats, in the first round. Then, over the course of the next 4 years in college, Nash won WCC Player of the Year award 2 times in a row, averaging over 20 points per game, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds in a single season. He ended his career there as the school's all-time leader in assists, free throw percentage, and made threes. Finally, Steve Nash was getting some of the national attention he deserved. But not everyone was sold on the kid from Canada. You see, going into the 1996 draft, scouts saw Steve Nash as a huge risk. At just 6'3" and 178 pounds, Nash was likely going to struggle defensively against all the NBA talent. And his size wasn't the only problem. Scouts also worried that he was too slow for the game as well. One scout even referred to him as, quote, an easy target for quick guards to blow by, and suggested he'd never really be able to play defense in the NBA. Remember, this was the 1996 draft class, one of the greatest of all time, with players like Allen Iverson, Kobe Bryant, and Ray Allen, just to name a few. So, when Steve Nash was selected with the 15th pick
in the 1996 NBA draft, the Phoenix Suns select Steve Nash.
The Suns literally booed their new star. Pretty brutal looking back, seeing as he wound up being one of the franchise's all-time best players. But look at it from their perspective. Going into the 1996 season, the Phoenix Suns roster was loaded with guards. The team already had stars in both Kevin Johnson and Sam Cassell, plus a rising star in a young point guard named Jason Kidd, who they just traded for 2 years earlier.
This was a great time to start over and to not bury 5, because 5...
The team didn't need a project like Steve Nash. It needed someone they could plug and play who could help their failing defense. And unfortunately for Steve Nash, he just wasn't that guy. In fact, the fit wound up being so bad initially that Nash only averaged 10 minutes per game his rookie season. He didn't come close to making any of the 3 rookie teams, averaging just over 3 points, 2 assists, and 1 rebound in the 65 games he played. I'm sure Charles Barkley would have been clowning him for averaging a triple single.
What did he average in Chuck? A triple single?
Now, Nash was able to showcase more of his skill the following year, increasing his averages to 9 points on 20 minutes per game, but he still hadn't found his place into the starting rotation 2 years into his Phoenix tenure. You see, the problem was Jason Kidd had already blossomed into a multi-time All-Star. Unfortunately for Nash, his skill set and size limitations made him a horrible partner for Kidd in the backcourt. So essentially, Phoenix's future was tied to Jason Kidd, and Steve Nash was just their third-string backup, which was something that the Dallas Mavericks executive Don Nelson was well aware of. Going into the 1998 season, the Dallas Mavericks were ready to take a big swing. The team had just finished with a dismal record of 20-62 and had the 3rd lowest attendance rate in the entire league. The Mavs needed a total makeover, and GM Don Nelson had just a plan to do that. Don made trades on draft night to acquire future franchise cornerstone Dirk Nowitzki from the Milwaukee Bucks and backup point guard Steve Nash from the Suns.
The trade that we were able to make during the draft not only got us the draft pick that we wanted, but also got us the point guard that we wanted.
He paired them with all-star Michael Finley, and somehow in just one night, the Mavericks pulled off a rebuild of a lifetime. In Dallas, Nash finally had the room necessary to grow into his own. Now, the team underperformed their first season, going 19-31 in a partial lockout year. The following year, they improved a little bit, but Nash only wound up playing half the season due to a nagging injury. But in 2000, Nash was finally able to connect the dots, improving his averages to 15 points, 7 assists, and 3 rebounds a game. As the franchise point guard, he led the Mavs to their first playoff appearance in over a decade. From 2000 on, Nash became a reoccurring All-Star, securing multiple seasons on the All-NBA third team, and finally making a name for himself in the playoffs too. The Nash-Nowitzki duo took the Mavericks all the way to the Western Conference Finals in 2003. Nash led that series in assists and shot over 60% from three-point range. Unfortunately, they lost to the San Antonio Spurs, who went on to become the NBA champions, so there was really no shame in that. Unfortunately, though, the Mavericks' upward trajectory finally stalled out in 2005, as the team underperformed in the first round of the playoffs, losing to the Sacramento Kings in 4-1. This left the Mavs at an uncomfortable crossroads. You see, the team was definitely succeeding with Steve Nash at the helm. The Mavericks had a lot of mouths to feed. They had new additions in Antoine Jamison and Antoine Walker, who were both making an impact on the offensive end and the cap sheet. Plus, the new owner, Mark Cuban, knew he had to make sure he had enough money to pay Dirk Nowitzki a max contract in just another year. So he made the decision to lowball Steve Nash with a contract offer. 4 years, $9 million per year. That's extremely disrespectful if you're Steve Nash, a two-time All-Star, averaging nearly a double-double on 50, 40, 90 shooting splits, and taking the bottom-of-the-barrel franchise to the Western Conference Finals. Yikes. This mistake opened up a window for another team to swoop in and steal Nash with a better offer. And funny enough, that team wound up being the organization Nash knew pretty well, the Phoenix Suns.
When the floodgates of free agency opened up on July 1, we had one specific goal, and that purpose is sitting right next to me.
That's right. 6 years after trading him due to having too many guards on the roster, the Phoenix Suns found them in desperate need of a new guard. But what made them come crawling back to Nash? Well, the truth is the Jason Kidd experiment in Phoenix had finally run its course. The team had lost in the first round of the playoffs 4 of the last 5 years, and Kidd was being charged with domestic abuse by his own wife. So suddenly, the Suns found themselves with an open cap sheet and an open starting point guard position. So they offered Steve Nash a reunion at the price of 6 years, $63 million, which is about $35 million more than the Mavericks offered. Of course, Steve Nash took the huge deal, but he wound up being worth so much more. Upon returning to Phoenix, Steve Nash evolved into a god-tier playmaker. His assists skyrocketed to a league-leading 11.5 per game, giving the Suns the best offensive rating in the league and the best overall record in the West. The turnaround with Nash was so stark that the team was able to improve their record from the previous season by 33 games. How is that possible? Well, Coach Mike D'Antoni created a revolutionary style of offense called the 7 seconds or less Suns. With Steve Nash at the point, D'Antoni suddenly had the ability to execute his dream of a fast-paced, space-and-shoot system. This approach was an early predecessor to the style Steph Curry and the Warriors would later use to dominate the league. In this system, Nash's job was simple but brilliant. Set up one of the team's many weapons for an open shot in 7 seconds or less. This relentless speed left opposing defenses scrambling, giving the Suns and Steve Nash the perfect opportunity to thrive in the chaos. And thrive he did. Within the 7 seconds or less offense, Nash was able to win the MVP 2 years in a row, famously beating out a 21-year-old LeBron James, a prime Kobe Bryant who averaged 35 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game, and the most dominant big man ever, Shaquille O'Neal, who still is pretty salty about that loss all these years later.
Was he true MVP or was he a sympathy MVP?
No, he was a true MVP.
Over me? Twice? Oh, get out of here.
And guess what? Shaq wasn't the only one upset or in regret about Nash's surprise renaissance. In fact, Mark Cuban said this about Nash in a recent appearance on the Draymond Green podcast.
Great guy. Love him to death. You know, we're friends again. But yeah, it was a mistake. The biggest mistake I ever made with the Mavs.
During this second run in Phoenix, Steve Nash went being from Jason Kidd's shitty backup to humiliating every team in the NBA. Just check out these highlights. Here he is crossing up Anderson Varejao for an easy layup on the Cavs.
Now 5.5 behind Dallas. They lost to the Mavericks the other night.
Here he is probing the offense and just dribbling around a young OKC team until they're lost. Just look how confused Kendrick Perkins is. Nash combined his incredible finishing and handle with a jumper that was wet, both from the mid-range and the three-pointer. Plus, he would pick apart defenses with his insane basketball IQ and pacing. Like this play here where he orchestrates the entire offense, first getting everyone into place, then attacking with a pick and roll to get a switch on the big, resetting once again, only to attack off a dribble for the second time, which leaves him for an easy pull-up jumper. This sort of pace and play and dribbling and shooting is how he became a top 75 player of all time. And of course, we can't forget his passing. This man won the assist title 5 times with drop-off dimes like this. Insane behind-the-head passes like this one. And he nearly won Amari Stoudemire the dunk contest with 2 of these passes. Somehow Nash elevated himself to a place no one in the sports world thought possible, leaving him with only one thing left to solidify him as an all-time great, a championship, which literally set him up for a head-on collision with one of the most dominant teams of all time. In the 2007 postseason, Nash found himself matched up with a familiar opponent, the San Antonio Spurs. But this time, Nash's team had itself home court advantage, bringing us to Game 1 of the series in downtown Phoenix. And of course, the game wound up being a total barn burner. The Suns were putting up a great fight, but the Spurs were starting to assert themselves late. And then, everything changed. Nash collided with Tony Parker head on, and though the clip doesn't look too physical, this was the result of it. Not ideal at all. The team doctor tried to bandage Nash up on the sideline, but somehow this was the best they could do. Luckily for Suns fans, Steve Nash was ready for the challenge. He returned to the game wearing this giant bandage on his face and still found a way to ball out. Here he is hitting a gorgeous game-tying three with just 2 minutes left, Band-Aid and all. What Nash did that night was the stuff of legends, and by all accounts, it looked like the Suns had the momentum they needed to close out a vital Game 1. But unfortunately, Nash's nose had other ideas. In the late fourth quarter, Nash's nose just wouldn't stop bleeding, so he was forced to sit on the bench for the remainder of the game, where he watched the Spurs close out against his team in heartbreaking fashion. Somehow, the physicality didn't end there either, and wound up being a huge factor in the series later on, resulting in this moment in Game 5, where Nash took another blow from veteran Robert Horry. The brawl that resulted from that incident wound up getting 2 of the Sun stars suspended for the following game, more or less securing the conference finals for the San Antonio Spurs, once again who would go on to win the NBA Finals. Unfortunately for Nash and the Suns fans, that year wound up being their best shot at a championship in their era. In the years that followed, the team slowly unraveled one piece at a time. In 2007, they traded Sharp Marion to acquire Shaq, which ruined their pace and resulted in another loss to the Spurs. Then the following year, the team lost Mike D'Antoni to the New York Knicks. And finally, in 2010, after making it to the Western Conference Finals again, they promptly fell on their faces, getting clowned by Kobe Bryant, who was on a revenge tour at that time. After, Amari Stoudemire had enough and he opted out to join the New York Knicks and Mike D'Antoni, leaving Steve Nash in Phoenix all by himself with his best years behind him. For his final 2 seasons, Nash took a flyer to join the Lakers super team, which wound up being a super disappointment. Unfortunately, he was only able to play 15 games in his final season due to nerve damage in his lower back. Thanks a lot, Robert Horry. And although the end of his career ended with a bit of a whimper, it's undeniable that Nash's play had an outstanding impact on the league and the game at basketball at large. Steve Nash's play under Mike D'Antoni wound up being the blueprint for all the pace and space basketball we've seen in the modern era. Nash was working with the Warriors as a consultant when they won 2 of their latest championships. In fact, Stephen Curry himself says that he modeled his game directly off of Steve Nash.
Like the player that you would emulate when you were that age? Like so many kids now, it's like you for them. Like who was your model?
The model was Steve Nash and Reggie Miller.
And believe me, Stephen Curry's not the only one. Sure, Shaq has some beef.
I'm sorry. Come on, Shaq. Let it go. Come on, man. Shaq, let it go, man. Let it go, Shaq.
But everyone else in the basketball world has been giving this man his deserved flowers.
Steve Nash plays free throw line out. He's really a three-point shooter.
He was so difficult to guard because of the players that he played around and just how smart he was with the basketball.
And so, after 18 long seasons, Steve Nash, an undersized Canadian soccer player, was somehow able to earn the respect of NBA fans and players worldwide, directly reshaping the sport of basketball as we know it. A pretty big feat for a man of such small stature. But what's your favorite moment of Steve Nash's career? Do you think that Dirk and Nash could have won a championship if Mark Cuban had kept the team together? And where do you rank Steve Nash as a point guard all time? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by subscribing. Make sure to tick on the notifications because the next Henry Hoops video is about how a fat and lazy slob took his revenge on the entire NBA. It's going to be wild. Peace.